to AD1. Okay? You will see an increase in general price level from P0 to P1. What happens if your AD continues to increase and only your AD increases? So your AD keeps on increasing, what you realize that as it approaches the full employment level of output at YF, that's the maximum output that can be produced in the economy. All your resources are already fully utilized, and what you observe is that there is only an increase in general price level. You don't see any further increase in output. That's where your growth is not sustained. So if you only have your AD increasing, growth cannot be sustained. Similarly, let's look at what happens when only your LRAS increase. When your LRAS increase, so original equilibrium is here, AD remains the same. There's no increase in AD, you only increase LRAS. So your LRAS shifts to the right. You increase the productive capacity of the economy. AD stays the same. What do you notice? There is no increase in output. So again, here, AD no change, only increasing LRAS. There's no change in output. So again, growth is not sustained. So how do you achieve sustained growth in the long term? You must have an increase in both AD and LRAS. Both AD and LRAS must increase in tandem for you to achieve sustained growth. Remember at the start of the lecture, I told you need to know 3 types of growth. Sustained growth, sustainable growth, and inclusive growth. So to achieve sustained growth, both aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply must increase in tandem for you to achieve sustained growth. Now, I want to move on to the benefits of sustained growth. What are the consequences? You can bring about certain positive and negative consequences when we grow the economy. So let's look at the benefits first. I will only go through some of the consequences, not all, because some are very self-explanatory. You can read up on your own. So I'll just focus on a few of them. Okay, page 14. With high economic growth, there will be higher standards of living. Standards of living meaning when there's positive economic growth rate, there's higher real national income in the country, households will be having higher income, they have higher purchasing power, they have greater ability to buy and consume more goods and services. And when that happens, your material standard of living will be higher. Okay, at the same time, when households have more income, they will have more income to spend on better quality education, better quality healthcare. And that can enhance the literacy rate and life expectancy, leading to higher non-material standards of living. Okay, I'll merely summarize the points here. It's the same as what you have in your lecture notes. Lastly, here, with economic growth, people are earning higher income, meaning you will have to pay higher income tax. Government can collect higher income tax revenue. Same thing. When you have economic growth, it means that your firms can earn more profits. Then the government can collect more corporate tax revenue. Okay, when the consumers have high income, they consume more goods and services, government can also collect more GST revenue. So all these will cause the government to collect more tax revenue. And if the government were to use higher tax revenue to fund education programs, improve the healthcare facilities, that will enhance our literacy rate and life expectancy in the country, leading to higher non-material SOL. Okay, so when you want to talk about in your SOL, talk about both material and non-material standards of living. Okay? Next, with sustained economic growth, it can also lower unemployment. So I think this one you can understand, right? When you produce more output in the economy, what does it mean? Firms will have to hire more labor. When you hire more labor, you will reduce unemployment. Okay? With high economic growth, same thing. Economy is growing, doing very well. Investors, both the domestic and foreign investors, will be more willing to invest in the country. You'll find it more confident that you'll be very profitable to invest, set up firms in the country. So more firms will come over and set up firms in Singapore, for example. You'll create more job opportunities, and this will lower unemployment. So basically, when there's economic growth, firms will find it more profitable to invest. You'll set up firms in Singapore, you create more job opportunities, you lower unemployment. Okay, very intuitive as well. Next, it can also lead to lower inflation when we achieve sustained growth. Recall, just now I did say, when you achieve sustained growth, that means both your AD and RAS increase. And when that happens, you also achieve lower inflation. So now, if you look at this diagram here, if you only see an increase in AD, like what I go through with you just now, only AD increases, your general price level will increase. Right? That's when you only have actual growth. But if your AD increase is accompanied by an increase in RAS, that means both AD, AS increase. What do you notice about the general price level? The GPL will increase only to P2. Okay? So I say again, now you look at this diagram. If you only increase your aggregate demand, general price level will increase from P0 to P1. But if you also increase your LRAS at the same time to achieve sustained growth, your general price level only increases by a smaller extent. It will increase from P0 to P2. You see a smaller increase in GPL. So when you achieve sustained growth, you also moderate the inflationary pressures. There will be slower increase in general price level. So when you achieve sustained growth, you also achieve lower inflation. Okay, so I covered the benefits of growth. When you have higher economic growth, there will be higher standards of living. You can also have lower unemployment. You can also achieve price stability. Okay, there are other consequences in the notes you can read out on yourself because they're rather self-explanatory. Now, let's move on to the cost. All these are not foreign to you. Okay, some of them you already covered in your S-Law indicators notes. They've also been covered in your AES notes. Okay, those earlier topics build up the foundation for you to better understand this topic on your 4 macro goals. Okay, now what are the costs, the negative consequences of sustained economic growth? One of them would be it will lead to environmental degradation. Okay, so when economic growth is driven by industrialization, firms will be creating a lot of pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, water pollution. Sometimes governments may even need to clear the forest so they have more land to build more factories so they can produce more output to grow the economy. Right? And when that happens, you will worsen the quality of the environment. People could be breathing in a very polluted air. It will harm their health, so it will worsen people's non-material standards of living. Okay? Next. Another cause of sustained growth is it will lead to rapid resource depletion. Your resources will deplete very quickly, especially non-renewable resources. Economic growth can be a result of the country using a greater amount of resources to produce more output. Make sense, right? You use a lot of resources to produce more output. So that will cause your resources to run out eventually, especially non-renewable resources, such as your fossil fuels like your crude oil, your natural gas. They will eventually run out because they are finite in quantities. Okay, so as these non-renewable resources become more and more scarce, okay, it will lead to shortages. You push up the prices of these resources, and then when the price of the resources go up, it will push up the cost of production for the firms in the economy, and it can lead to inflation, particularly cost-push inflation, which we'll learn more about the different types of inflation later on. Okay, so when the economy is growing rapidly, it can also deplete your resources as well, especially non-renewable resources. Last one, another cause of high sustained economic growth is that it will worsen income inequality. As we all know, when there's economic growth, it doesn't benefit everyone equally. Some people will benefit more from growth. Okay, who are these people? Generally, people who are more skilled, they're more educated, they could be working in sunrise industries that are booming. Okay, there could be a higher demand for these educated, skilled workers that push up their wages. They will experience larger increase in their income. Versus those who are working in the sunset industries already on decline, the wages, they may be retrenched. Or maybe their incomes can stay stagnant or may even fall. So this will lead to a larger income gap. Okay? they own factors of production like your business owners, they also tend to benefit from economic growth compared to a normal worker, right? So because of these negative unintended consequences of economic growth, what happens? Should we just focus on growing the economy at all costs? You shouldn't, right? You shouldn't just focus on growing the economy. You shouldn't just focus on growing the GDP in the country, because we also need to look at the environmental aspects of growth. We also need to look at the social aspects of growth. Okay, we cannot be so narrow-minded, just focus on growing the economy, increasing your GDP in the country, producing more output. Like what we've gone through earlier on, you will deplete your resources, you will pollute the environment, you will lead to widening income gap. Eventually, your growth cannot be sustained. It's not good for future generations. So we do need to care for the environment and care about the social aspects. So in this sense, we need to have a broader concept of growth. We don't just want to achieve growth that is sustained, we also want growth to be sustainable and inclusive. So this brings us to the next type of growth. We're done with sustained growth. Let's recap on sustainable growth, which we have gone through with you under the first topic on SOL. Okay? So we need to have sustainable growth as well. So what is sustainable growth? First of all, the economy must be growing at a strong and stable rate. So the ones that are highlighted in yellow, what does it mean? To achieve sustainable growth, I must first have the economy growing. I must have sustained growth. Okay? So this one, I'm referring to the achievement of sustained growth. So for you to consider having sustainable growth, you must first achieve sustained growth. That means your AD and your LRS must increase, you must have actual potential growth, meaning you must have sustained growth. That will be the prerequisite for achieving sustainable growth. Once you achieve sustained growth, then you must also make sure that at the same time, there shouldn't be significant environmental degradation and resource depletion. You should minimize environmental degradation and resource depletion as you try to grow the economy, increase the GDP in the country, to make sure that growth is sustainable. So what does sustainability means? Okay, some examples given to you. It can mean reducing the amount of pollution, reducing the amount of harmful gas emissions. How could you do that? Maybe you can encourage firms to adopt green technology. When you adopt green technology, you can produce more output, but at the same time, it's less pollutive. You can conserve natural resources. It's a more sustainable, cleaner methods of production. Okay, what about in terms of transportation? You can use electric vehicles instead of using fuel-powered vehicles. That will reduce the amount of pollution in the country. Okay? Sustainability also may mean improving your waste management. What does improving waste management mean? It can be in terms of disposing your waste properly. You don't just discharge your chemical waste into the rivers and pollute the rivers, right? It can also be in terms of reducing the amount of waste that we generate, okay, to the landfills, through promoting recycling, upcycling, and so on, so there will be less waste generated. Okay? It can also mean preserving biodiversity and ecosystems through conservation of our resources. Okay? Another example here is the need to moderate the use of our resources, especially the non-renewable ones. The non-renewable resources, we need to use it more efficiently and responsibly. Because what we want is to make sure there's sufficient resources available for the future generations. Okay? If not, once your renewable resources are all depleted, you don't have resources left for your future generations, then how? Do you think growth can be sustained and sustainable in the long term? No. Okay? So, for example, we have been always encouraging firms to use more, that means countries have been adopting using renewable sources of energy, right? Instead of fossil fuels to generate electricity. Now, what is Singapore's approach to achieving sustainable development? Okay? You should know that Singapore, we have this green plan here. Okay? It is a national sustainability movement to rally collective action to tackle climate change. So the long-term goal is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So there are basically 5 key pillars here: city in nature, sustainable living, energy reset, green economy, and resilient future. Okay, I'll just read out some of the examples that's given to you here. These are some of the key targets that our government tries to achieve to make Singapore a green and livable place for all of us to achieve sustainable development. So for example, the government plans to plant 1 million more trees. Okay, they want to make sure, for example, schools here, at least 20% of the schools must be carbon neutral by 2030. So you want to reduce the amount of carbon emissions from the school sector. Okay, they want to expand the rail network, triple the cycling path network. Okay, using cleaner modes of transportation and so on. Don't drive, you just cycle to your next destination. Reducing the amount of waste to the landfills per capita per day by 20% by 2016. Reducing household water consumption and so on. Okay, new car registrations must be of cleaner models, cleaner energy models from 2030. So these are various targets that the government has in mind. Okay, and it encourages collective action for all Singaporeans. Okay, whether you are the consumers or the firms, to help us achieve this long-term goal, to cut emissions in the country. Now, what are the benefits of achieving sustainable economic growth? Okay, higher standards of living. When the government uses green technology to boost growth, like they use renewable sources of energy to generate electricity, right? It will create less pollution. Okay? When you create less pollution, it can improve the quality of life of the people because they breathe in cleaner air, cleaner water, right? To consume, so your non-material as well will be higher. Next, when you achieve sustainable growth, it also means that there's more sustainable use of your resources, so that you can make sure you have sufficient resources available for your future generations. And when you have sufficient resources for them, you will ensure there will be sufficient goods and services available for your future generations. You can sustain their standards of living in the future. Okay? Now, achieving sustainable growth can also achieve a lower unemployment in the country. So for example, when a country is moving towards achieving sustainable growth, for example in Singapore here, it's taken from a Straits Times article last year, okay, the government is pumping in more money into green sectors. What do I mean by green sectors here? Okay, some examples are given to you here: solar, electric mobility, built environment, sustainable farming, waste management. So when the government pumps in more money to develop these green sectors, because you want to be a green economy, right, you create more green jobs to lower unemployment. So what are some examples of green jobs? Okay, I also given you two examples here. Sustainability consultants. Okay, to help businesses develop, implement sustainable practices, conduct environmental impact assessments. Okay, another example here, green building architects and engineers to help design energy efficient buildings. So that will help us to reduce our energy consumption, okay, to achieve sustainability. Now, when you achieve sustainable economic growth, you also improve allocative efficiency. Recall that's something that you learned last year under market failure topic. Okay, now this one recall, when there's higher economic growth, firms will pollute the environment, right? There will be the creation of your marginal external costs. Okay, it result in a divergence between NPC and MSC. There will be overproduction of the output at QP. Okay, overproduction relative to QS because it's more than the socially optimal level output. It will create this day rate loss. Now, if the country adopts sustainable practices using cleaner methods of production, you will pollute less. You pollute less means you lower marginal external costs. You reduce the amount of negative externalities generated. So what you see in the diagram is this. Okay, you'll see a smaller divergence between your NPC and your MSC curve. So with the smaller divergence here, what do you notice? You can actually, socially optimal level of output is now higher. You can actually increase your output in the country while making sure that it's less polluted. Okay, and then the day rate loss here is also smaller. Okay, I added this diagram here for you to better understand that para of explanation in your notes. Okay, next. Okay, after we talk about the benefits of achieving sustainable growth, okay, there are certain costs. Okay, unfortunately, when we try to achieve sustainable growth, the country may face a slower rate of growth. You try to pursue sustainability, you have to face a slower rate of growth. How can that happen? So if the government wants to reduce the amount of pollution in the country, they may implement carbon taxes, right? To encourage firms to use cleaner methods of production to reduce the amount of carbon emissions. So when that happens, when you implement carbon taxes, it will increase firms' cost of production. So when you increase firms' cost of production, what happens? Your investors who are profit maximizing, they will experience a fall in the profits. They will be less willing to invest when you add on to their cost of production. So with lesser investments, there will be a fall in AD, you slow down economic growth. Okay? Then at the same time, when the firms are having a higher cost of production, this means that the exports will be more expensive. When the exports are more expensive, assuming the demand for your exports is price elastic, that would mean a more than proportionate fall in the quantity demanded for your exports. Your export revenue will fall, your AD will fall, and again, it will slow down economic growth. So this is trying to tell you that when the government is trying to achieve sustainability through certain policies like carbon taxes, you will face an economic slowdown. So there is a trade-off here between achieving higher rates of growth and one that is sustainable. Okay? Now the last one, inclusive growth. Inclusive growth is when the economy is growing at a strong and stable rate. So similarly, for you to achieve inclusive growth, you must also achieve sustainable. You must make sure there's actual potential growth. Okay? Then you look at how you can lower income inequality. You make sure your growth do not worsen income inequality. And how can this be achieved? Okay, for example, the government may tax the rich more and then redistribute the income to the poor through transfer payments. You subsidize the lower income group to raise their disposable income to close the income gap. Okay? You can also lower income inequality by providing education, training opportunities for the workers, especially your lower skilled workers. So when your lower skilled workers, they attend education and training, they become more educated, you're more highly skilled, you can be more productive, you can earn higher wages. So when you earn higher wages, you close the income gap. Okay? So what are the benefits of achieving inclusive growth? One of them is, again, higher standards of living. So what are the reasons? Why do we want to pursue all these goals? Basically, it will help to raise our standards of living. Okay? So if growth takes place in various sectors of the economy, it means the growth is broad-based. It's broad-based across various economic sectors. The income will be more evenly distributed. When income is more evenly distributed, it means you will have a larger proportion of the population having higher income, higher purchasing power. They have the ability to buy and consume more goods and services. You will have higher material as well for the average citizen. When you have lower income inequality, there will be lesser social tension, promote greater social harmony. Right? So lower income inequality is also often associated with reduced crime rates, and that can help you to have a safer environment to live in. That will improve the non-material standards of living. Okay, when you achieve more inclusive growth, you will have higher material and non-material standards of living. Okay, a cost. A cost of inclusive growth. Something very important here. When you pursue inclusive growth, the government, the country country will also face a slower rate of growth. So, for example, when the government wants to reduce income inequality in the country, they can adopt a progressive income tax system. A progressive income tax system is what? You charge the higher income group at a higher tax rate. They have to pay more income tax. Whereas the lower income group, they are charged at a lower income tax, they will pay less tax. So this will help to reduce income inequality. Okay, that means a higher income group, the more you earn, the more income tax you need to pay because you're charged at a higher tax rate. And so what is the negative implication of this? You will discourage foreign investors from investing in the economy. Because if they come here to invest, okay, if they earn a lot of money, higher income, they also need to pay higher income tax. Okay, here I'm not talking about corporate tax, huh? When you earn a lot of income, they need to pay high income tax. You discourage them from coming over here to even invest. So there will be a fall in investments, fall in AD, you slow down the economy. Next, when you have this progressive income tax system, like what I said, the more you earn, the more tax you need to pay. So this will cause the local talents to leave the country. You also deter foreign talents from coming to our country. So this one will slow down the increase in the LRAS. Remember, RAS is affected by the quantity of income. Okay, so you slow down the increase in RAS, you slow down potential growth. So again, you want to pursue inclusive, sustainable growth, there will be a trade-off. Okay, you want to achieve higher inclusiveness, you want to achieve greater sustainability, you may have to face a slower economic growth. And that is a trade-off that is very important for you to take note. Okay, at this point, I want you to take your attendance for today's lecture, scan your QR code here. I'll also pass the time over to Ms. Cole to continue with the lecture.
My relative, my cousin. Huh? What? No, this one is, you know the Angmo term, right? They got what? Once remove, twice remove cousin. This one is 1,000 times remove. Oh, this one cut off. Which guy? That one no longer here. His training finished already, what? Differential treatment. Bias against men.
Maybe the one is a trainee.
Huh?
Maybe the one is a trainee.
Everyone is a trainee, what?
Because they just shows you we have big tutorial in the back of class.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it's the one that should give chance.
What are you doing?
Never seen that.
Okay, now everyone ready? Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Miss Cole, and continuing on what Miss Cheng has talked to you about the different types of economic growth, now I'll be talking about the causes and issues when you face with undesirable rates of economic growth. Okay, so firstly, what causes poor or unsustained economic growth is that firstly, you have a negative economic growth. So, what is negative economic growth is that when you have a fall in AD or a weak AD. So what affects your AD is your components of AD, right? So for example, if there's a fall in consumers' confidence for large economies like US, which are largely dependent on their domestic consumption expenditure, their C, or a small economy like us, Singapore, where exports is our main component of our AD, then if your X falls or your C falls, this leads to a fall in AD. Okay? So next, a negative economic growth can also happen when you have a fall in SRAS. So recall that the factors affecting SRAS is your unit cost of production. So when there is a rising cost of production, for example, your labor or your land cost, this would in turn have a fall in your SRAS. So when there's a fall in SRAS, it affects your horizontal range of your AS curve. Your AS would shift leftwards and upwards to AS2. So a fall in SRAS will also mean that you have a negative economic growth. Okay, so next, a slow economic growth is also a cause of your poor or unsustained economic growth. So for example, if you have an insufficient growth in AD, your actual growth, or your AS, your potential growth, this means that your economy is weak. Okay, so a slow economic growth will mean that your rise in AD or your LRAS is insufficient. So your economy is weak and it's slow. Okay, so if you look at your lecture notes on page 24, you will see this diagram over here. So some of the examples of a slow economic growth is that you have low productivity or you are having an aging population. So this affects your quantity of factors of production, which affects LRAS. And your external factors, for example, your world pandemic or global political stability will affect your demand for exports. So your AD or your AS affecting, and there's an insufficient growth, right? This will lead to a slow economic growth in general. Okay? So next, overheating of economy. So if the increase in AD is faster than LRAS, then it means that your economy is operating close or to its productive capacity. So what do I mean by that? So if you look at lecture notes, you will see this part over here. So if your economic growth is driven by an increase in AD without the increase in any of your vertical range of your AS, which is your LRAS, this will result in your growth becomes unsustained. So what do I mean by that? Is that if you look at this part over here, if my economic growth is that I increase AD only, so from AD2 to AD3, this means that my economy is already operating at its full employment output level. So my resources are fully utilized, right? So you can see that my GPL increases significantly, but my output still stays the same at YF. So this means that my general price level is increasing without increasing in my real national output. So this means my economy is overheating. So overheating would mean this over here. Okay? So next, other than if you have a rapid increase in AD, overheating of economy will also mean that you have difficulties in expanding your productive capacity, meaning you're increasing in your LRAS. So if you recall, the factors of affecting LRAS is your changing quantity and quality of resources and the technology available. So this means that you have difficulties in having these to affect your LRAS. Okay? So for example, economies may lack sufficient resources such as capital or skilled labor, like strict immigration policies or aging workforce. So this affects your quantity and quality of labor. Hence, your increase in LRAS is limited, so you are unable to achieve sustained economic growth. Okay? So next, it could also mean that you have a structural rigidity due to government failure. So what do I mean by that is that, for example, there is inadequate efforts to retrain your workers or to upgrade the current skill sets that's needed for the economy. So the government fails to keep up with the pace of the rapid technological advancement. So this will result in the decline of your productivity growth. So since the government's ability to boost productive capacity is constrained, so this means that your increase in potential growth is limited. Okay? So next, what causes unsustainable economic growth? So just now Ms. Chung has already mentioned, right? A sustainable economic growth means that you have a sustained, e.g., meaning increase in actual and potential growth, resulting in significant environmental degradation and resource depletion. So what do I mean by economic growth being unsustainable is that you fail to do these following criteria. So you do the exact opposite. So you have significant environmental degradation and you deplete your natural resources very quickly. Okay? So what are the causes? So firstly, if there is lack of strong environmental protection. So if my economic growth is not sustainable, it means that it may cause climate problems without effective public policies designed to ensure good environmental protection. So for example, if I have an economic growth, this means that my citizens are actually having a higher income. Then they can consume big ticket items like cars. If everyone gets a car, this means that I have higher number of vehicles on the roads. So if I have higher number of vehicles on the roads, this will introduce toxic materials into your atmosphere like your CO2, okay? Then this would have a negative impact on human health and ecosystem, and this could lead to an unsustainable economic growth. Okay? So another example is that if you use coal during production of goods and services, so sometimes for a country, if they want to drive economic growth, they will use raw materials, right, to produce goods and services. So one of it is to use coal, but we know that using coals will generate negative externalities, right? So this will result in what? Releasing of your airborne toxins and pollutants, affecting health of people living near the power plants. Okay, so this could also lead to unsustainable economic growth because it affects your environment. Okay? So next, another cause would be an undiversified economy. So for example, if the economic growth is solely dependent on extracting natural resources, then this would speed up resources depletion and polluting the environment. So in this case, the growth is unsustainable. So this whole point is just saying that if the economy is just focusing or specializing in highly polluting industries to stimulate growth, then this growth is unsustainable. Okay? Quite intuitive, this one. So I give you an example. So for example, in UK and Brunei, which is the current oil and natural gas producers, right? They are actually running out of oil and gas reserves. So they are actually depleting their natural resources, right? So when these resources run out, they are unable to continue production of oil and natural gas. And in addition, pollution also takes its toll on its economy and affecting health. So this means that UK and Brunei's economic growth is actually unsustainable because they are depleting on their natural resources and they are affecting on their environment as well. Okay, so next, this one, if an dependent on one or two sectors, then the growth will halt if the sector declines due to a fall in global demand for that product. So this factor here is quite similar to just now what I've been explaining. So for example, if the economy is depending on exporting natural resources or commodities to stimulate growth, then once they have depleted their resources via exporting them, or other countries finding more cheaper alternatives, then their economic growth will start to slow down. Okay, so their economic growth is also unsustainable as well. Okay, so now I'll move on to what causes non-inclusive economic growth. So as you can recall, what is inclusive growth? Inclusive growth is sustained growth that is broad-based across sectors without resulting in worsening of income inequality, and also to be able to create opportunities for all. So if you are unable to fulfill this criteria, you would have a non-inclusive economic growth. Okay? So firstly, what causes it? If the government has insufficient efforts to redistribute income. So this is also very intuitive, right? Non-inclusive growth will occur when there is a lack of government's efforts to reduce income inequality. So it is important that government should implement policies to address the widening income gap that could be brought about by the increase in economic growth. So for example, in Singapore, we have our GST vouchers. So this is when government will collect tax and redistribute it to the majority of the population in Singapore. So by collecting tax or doing transfer payments, you are then able to promote a more inclusive economic growth. Okay? So next, similarly, if the economy experience economic growth and only focus on growing a particular sector, then those working in the sector will be the only ones benefiting. Okay? So what this means is that, for example, if the economy is focusing on financial sector, then many jobs will be created in the sector. So my derived demand for the labor will increase, wage will increase for those that are working in the sector. So what happens if you are not working in this sector? So for those that are not working in the financial sector, economy is not focusing on these sectors. Okay, so there's lack of demand for workers in these sectors, so your wages are relatively lower for those that are in the financial sector that the government is focusing on. So this would mean that you have a widening income gap. Okay, so your growth over here, when the government is focusing on the financial sector, your growth is non-inclusive. Because those that are working in that financial sector, their wages will increase. Meanwhile, those that are not, the wages will be relatively lower. Okay? So similarly, there's another example in your lecture notes, which I won't cover it. You will read it on your own because roughly the understanding is similar to what I've mentioned. Okay? So next, globalization and rapid economic restructuring. So globalization, it allows Singapore to move up to a higher value chain. So if you can recall, in Singapore last time, we used to produce low value added labor intensive goods like clothing. But now as globalization and as Singapore has industrialized, Then we now move towards a higher value-added, capital-intensive manufacturing goods like designing microchip. So if we move from one value chain which is low to a higher value chain, this is called economic restructuring. We are focusing on another sector now. So this is called economic restructuring. So what happens is that when economy restructures, the country now moves towards developing new sectors like microchip designing, R&D, science and technology, right? So new jobs will be created in these new sectors. Older sectors like your sunset industries, those that are not prioritized anymore in the government, they will exit. So if the economic restructuring is too rapid, meaning the switch between the sunset industries to the new sectors is too fast, then workers may not have the required skills or time to retrain their skills that is needed for the economy now. So only those who have the necessary skills will attain jobs from these new sectors, and they benefit from the rising wages because now there is a high demand for people that is needed to work in that particular sector now. So this will mean that you have a non-inclusive economic growth because there's only selected number of people that can go into that particular sector since they have the required skills and they benefit from the increase in wages due to the high demand. Okay? So next, now I will be moving on to the consequences of negative or slow economic growth. Okay, so firstly, if you have negative or slow economic growth, you have a lower standard of living. So this is also very intuitive as well. When the economy is in recession or it has a negative economic growth, your real income per capita decreases. It lowers your purchasing power for households to consume goods and services. Your material standard of living decreases. So this is also kind of covered in your SOL tutorial questions already, right? Okay? So, and also if you have a lesser income due to negative or slow economic growth, households will tap onto their savings that they have earlier, and in order to maintain their consumption, they will tap into their savings to spend. So this would mean that their material standard of living in the future may be affected because now they have to tap into their savings to spend. So in the future, they will not have the same amount of money to spend on the same level of goods and services that they have now. Okay, so their material standard of living in the future may be affected. Okay, so next, also, if you have a slow economic growth, workers are more stressed. Why? Because they are scared of being retrenched. When you have a slow economic growth, this means that your economy is not doing well. So firms may try to decrease production, and then they do not need that much labor. So workers may be retrenched. So what if they are more stressed about this? This would lead to a worsening of mental well-being. Non-material SOL will decrease. Okay? So next, if you have a negative economic growth, lesser goods and services produced, you have a fall in demand for factors of production, including labor, then this would mean that you have an increase in your cyclical unemployment. Okay?
35. Page 35.
And also, when you have a poor economic growth, this also creates uncertainty and affects producers and consumers' confidence. Because if they see that the economy is doing poorly, their expectations of future economic outlook will be poor. So this affects their confidence in spending and investing. So your economic growth
Most productive one.
will be stagnant. Okay, and this would further increase cyclical unemployment in the short run and affecting your productive capacity in the long run because there is a reduction in investment. Okay, so next, there will be a fall in profit level for firms. So when there is a negative economic growth, your economy is slowing down, real income per capita falls. So when your purchasing power falls, consumers will cut back on spending their goods and services. So firms experience a fall in demand for goods and services. There is a fall in revenue and hence a fall in profits. Okay? So, slow economic growth can also reduce your optimism with the economy, which affects demand for goods and services and also your profits.
You going down to
for
buy
firms.
sandwich or not?
So, lastly, the consequences of negative and slow economic growth. When there's a slow and or negative economic growth, your declining sectors will be affected more. So your workers in your declining sectors will experience an even more greater income loss. So workers who are not equipped with the skills required by the growing sectors will not be able to find new employment because their skills are not matched with the upcoming sectors' skills that's required. So there is a structural unemployment and a greater inequality in income distribution. Okay, so the consequences of unsustainable economic growth is that firstly, you have lower standards of living. So same thing, unsustainable growth will lead to a more rapid resource depletion and environmental degradation, which can have a serious impact, especially on the future generation. Okay, and due to the rapid depletion of resources, there will be a reduction in output level for future generation to consume or to use, unless there is a technological improvement which can make up for the loss of production. Okay? So when you have a rapid depletion of resources, this would mean that there is lesser resources for future generation. Okay? So for the remaining factors and consequences, please go and read it up in your SLS package that will be released in your online learning day, which is next Tuesday. Okay?